Hare Krishna, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Today we're going to continue with our Sunday Bhagavatam class. There are some very nice verses today. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, we begin today with verse 1926, first canto, chapter 9, text 26. This is a description of Bhishma on the bed of arrows. And now, at Yudhishthira's request, Bhishma is going to explain basically how this world works. If you think of Bhishma's, not all prayers, but Bhishma's statements on the bed of arrows in the Bhagavatam, there's simple structure, which is Bhishma begins by glorifying Krishna. And then in the previous verse, Yudhishthira had some questions because Yudhishthira now has to govern the world. He's the new ruler of the world, and he's wondering, how am I going to do that? So the previous verse said, Sutu Vacha Yudhishthira Stata Karnya. So Yudhishthira, hearing Bhishma speak, Shayanam Sharapanjare Aprachat, he inquired from Bhishma, who was lying on the bed of arrows, Vividhan Dharman, so that's Spanish, sorry. He asked Bhishma about the various dharmas, like the different duties, because it's his responsibility now to see that everyone does their duty properly in society. So he asked about these different duties for different classes of people, and Rishinang Chanushin Matang, and the sages were also listening. So listening along, as I said, which is significant because Bhishma externally was a Kshatriya, but actually even the sages want to learn from him. So now, Sutta Goswami speaking, and he says that, talking about, well, this is actually in this verse, it's not Bhishma speaking yet. This is still describing what Yudhishthira asked about, because in the verse today, 1926, you may notice that that there's a lot of words ending in the letter N, like the first line, Purusha Swabhava Vitan, and then the last line, Amnato Bhaya Lakshanan. So those words ending in N, those compound phrases, are the object of the verb aprachat in the previous verse that Yudhishthira asked. So these two, the first and last line in this verse, are what Yudhishthira asked. He asked these things. So let's go into the verse more in detail. First, I'll read Prabhupada's translation, which is sounds a little complex, but then I think we can break it down. It'll be pretty simple. So at Maharaj Yudhishthira's inquiry, Bhishma Dev first defined. So technically, grammatically, this is still what Yudhishthira asked. All the classifications of castes and orders of life in terms of individuals' qualifications. Then he systematically, in twofold division, described counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. So, I'll explain that now. The first line, Purusha Svabhava Vihitan. Vihita here, or Vihitan, in the plural accusative case, means sort of ordained or established. So Purusha Svabhava Vihitan, the duties which are established for Purusha, for people, Swabhava, by their own nature. So this is very much what Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, that our duty actually arises from our nature. So you can't just look at somebody's body and then tell what their duty is. You have to actually know who they are. So actually, this line, Purusha Swabhava Vihitan, is modifying or explaining or referring to the third line in the previous verse, which is that Yudhisthira Aprachat asked about Vividhan Dharman. Prabhupada says multifarious duties or various dharmas. So Yudhisthira asked about various or multifarious dharmas, and then in the next verse, those dharmas, the first line of the next verse, is talking about those dharmas that Yudhisthira asked about. And those dharmas are vihitan, they're designated or they're established or they are ordained by a person's own nature. So the Vedic system is not a culture in which people are forced into unnatural, bizarre situations by a totalitarian king or something. I mean, that's, modern people who are, most of them, I can't say brilliant. That's the image they have of monarchy in general. But here, these Vividhan Dharman that you just asked about, these multifarious duties, are ordained, established by one's own nature. So you have to act according to your nature, which means that if we get too much into body stereotypes or gender stereotypes, we're going to mess up the system, because people must have the freedom to serve Krishna according to their own nature. And so those Vividhan, those multifarious or various duties, are yata varnam, according to varna, yatashramam, and according to ashram. So even though people, this is an important point, even though people have a God-given right or duty to serve according to their nature, but you can't just do anything and claim it's your nature. It has to be according to varna and ashram, your occupation and your sort of your social or family situation. In other words, so you have to identify, you have to locate yourself on this Vedic map according to varna and ashram. It's just like on a typical graph, there's the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. So, and then that was a graph. And so it's like, it's a typical graph where you have to have two axes, and then you locate something. Whether, for example, the horizontal axis can be years like 1990, 1991, et cetera, and the top one can be, let's say, how much money a company made. And so you see that, they started to make more money and then it went down. So that's a typical graph. It has two axes, so you can locate things. And that's the same with the varnashram system. And so that's why you can't just say, well, householders should do this, or sannyasi should, well, sannyasi is different, but, or even sannyasi actually, or sannyasi should do that, because you have to know also not only their ashram, but also their varna. Of course, for sannyasi, as I was saying, hopefully the sannyasi has developed a Brahminical nature. Otherwise, it's going to be trouble. When you have sannyasis with all the power of sannyasi, but they don't have a Brahminical nature. And we've seen that actually within the Hare Krishna movement. So let's say a grihasta, which is an easier example. So a grihasta, the grihasta, literally standing at home or staying at home. And so that tells you something about them. Someone is married, a man or a woman, but then what is their natural vocation? Is a man or a woman an intellectual, or is it natural for them to manage things or to make money, or, sort of manage the production of wealth or food or whatever, or is the person a Shudra? So you can't say that, in many cases, I mean, some things you can say about grihastas, such as, they should make sure they feed their children. So obviously there are some universal things about grihastas, but at the same time, in terms of specifically what they're going to do, you have to know not only their varna, but also their ashram, however you do that. So then you can locate the person in society. Okay, this is your natural position in society. This is what you should be doing because we have located you according to varna and ashram. So that's how the system worked. So Purusha Svabhava Vihitan Yatha Varnam Yathashramam. Yatha means according to varna, according to ashram. And Vairagya Rago Padipyam. And with, which Prabhupada translates this, it's a brilliant translation, a counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. So what this means is, Vairagya, of course, we know it means detachment. And then raga is the opposite. Because raga means attachment or passion, and V means often without. So viraga means passionless or not passionate. And so you have vairagya from the word viraga, passionless. So a passionless state is vairagya or detachment. And then raga. So you have both detachment and attachment, and upadi. The word is vairagya raga. If you look in the word for word, upadi means designation. As in that famous verse, Sarvopadi vinirmuktam tatparatvena nirmalam rishikesha rishikesha sevanam bhakti uttama. So the highest bhakti is Sarvopadi vinirma, to be free of sarva upadi, all designations. So designation can mean bodily designations, like we talk about bodily designations to identify with your gender, your age, your nationality, your ethnicity, et cetera, to actually identify with all of that, like this is who I am, which is illusion. And so real bhakti is sarvopadi vinirmukta, that you're free of all these designations. But here the word upadi, just like in English, the word designation can have that negative sense, like bodily designation, or it can simply mean a classification of something. And so when Prabhupada says here in his translation, counteraction, that is the sense of viraga, in the sense of, okay, I have material attachments because I have a material body, but I counteract that by detachment. Or I have attachments and I cannot give certain things up because I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to give them up yet. So therefore, because I have certain attachments, I interact with the material world, but within a context of bhakti yoga. So that's the counteraction by detachment. In other words, you counteract your own attachments. Or interaction, you have to dovetail your interaction. Here just means like dovetailing. Like, let's say I have a strong propensity to do business. Actually, I don't, but thank God some people do and are good at it. So then I interact with the world according to my propensity, and it gradually become purified. So that's what that's talking about. That the established that the Vividhan Dharman, remember this goes back to Yudhishthira's statement. He asked about various dharmas which are established by Vividhan, our own nature, the nature of the person, according to Varna and Ashram. You can't go wild and do crazy things. You have to, these duties always are within the Varnashram system. And there are two basic strategies. If you are able to overcome your attachments and you just give them up or avoid certain activities, if you can't overcome them at this stage, you engage them by acting in the world. And so that's what that means. And then these duties are amnato bhayalakshanan. It's interesting. So this vairagya raga, which also is exactly what the terminology of pravriti, nivriti. So pravriti is the interaction. Pra means forth, like pravriti means like functioning. So something just, you get into it. That's pravriti. And nivriti means you get out of it. But in both cases, they're strategies for spiritual advancement. So that nivriti, pravriti here is same thing as vairagya, raga. And so the characteristics, lakshana, I want to give you exact definitions. This last line, amnata ubhaya lakshanan, because this is, these are interesting words in Sanskrit. So first of all, the word lakshana means a symptom or visible characteristic. Let's see what the dictionary says. A mark, sign, symbol, token, characteristic, attribute, quality. I said visible because laksh means, it's a verb, means to see also. So symptom, as I said, definition, designation, a type of thing. So, but sort of like a visible symbol. That's what a symbol is. You can see it, or a token, or mark, or the sign of something, the characteristic of something. And so ubhaya means both. So both duties, again, this last line, lakshanan, it ends in a long A and an N because it's referring back to the previous verse of the Vividhan Dharman, the various dharmas that Yudhishthira asked about. Amnata means according to authority, sort of in what we would say in disciplic succession, handed down in sacred texts. Handed down in sacred texts. It's a word which you find in the Bhagavatam. Amnata. So, or, we say in ISKCON, bona fide or coming from Shastra. So the marks or the characteristics or the signs of vairagya, and like, how do you know when you should give something up? How do you know when you should interact with the world? According to Varna and Ashram. So both of these categories of symptoms are sort of recognizing qualities in yourself or recognizing behavior of others. Amnata, you have to find that in bona fide authorities, such as Shastra. So that's what these two verses are talking about, actually. So, so let's go to the next verse. And so here are some of the Vividhan Dharman. We're still, again, the first line, and this whole verse actually, and directly the first and third lines are still objects of the verb Yudhishthira apricchata. Yudhishthira asked. So these are still things that Yudhishthira asked. So in a sense, the first three verses, how many? No, we've only done, this is only the second one actually. Or the last verse last Sunday. So verses 1, 9, 25, 26, and 27. These three verses are all actually in Sanskrit one long sentence. This is still these three verses are one sentence because, again, if you look at the first line, Dana Dharman, Raja Dharman, which means charity duties and royal duties, Dana Dharman, Raja Dharman, and then the third line, Sri Dharman, women's duties, Bhagavad Dharman, and ultimately devotees' duties. All these words are objects of the verb apricchata. He asked, Yudhishthira asked. So these are still the things that Yudhishthira is asking. I want to mention that because it's easy to assume that every verse that we, the numbers, because that all these verses, each individual verse is a separate sentence, but often that's not the case. So the last three verses are one sentence. So Yudhishthira asked about Dana, which as in dana, from the word dana, we have the English word donation, and Sanskrit, Portuguese, Italian, da, give, to give, dar, dare, to give, and donner in French, and German is geben. So all these, so dana, giving. So the dharma of giving, literally, the dharma, or the dharmas, it's plural, the dharmas, the duties of giving or charity, raja dharman, the duties of kings, the dharmas of kings, royal duties, moksha dharman, the duties that lead to liberation. Like what duties or what dharmas do you perform to get liberation? Vibhagashaha. So vibhaga means a category or division. And so the shaha means, according to it, just makes it an adverb. So so we had the word vividhan dharman, and here we have vibhagasha. These are all the same words. I mean, these are all synonyms, meaning he asked categorically. He's going in a very systematic, categorical way. Stri dharman, women's duties, bhagavat dharman, devotees' duties, or actually more accurately, duties directly to God. Like, for example, if you're married, you have certain duties to your spouse. A man has duties to his wife, and a wife has duties to her husband. They both have duties to their children. The children have duties to the parents. And of course, these things can all be done in Krishna consciousness, but some dharmas are directly for God. It's not that you're dovetailing something, it's just a duty which is directly done for God, such as preaching his glories or worshiping him. And so Yudhishthira asked about all these things, samasa vyasa yogataha, which is very interesting. Yoga can also be the means, or the how you do something, like bhakti yoga, the practice of bhakti. So the practice of something, or the means, the practical way you do something. So Yudhishthira asked about all these dharmas according to the practical methods of samasa and vyasa. Asa, the word asa in Sanskrit means to place, and it's connected to the word asana, which is kind of your seat where you place yourself. And so like sankirtan, together, so placing together, which means sort of synthetic understanding. You like, what's the big picture? You put everything together, and then there's that sort of what's called synthetic. Sin, actually, S-Y-N, comes from Sanskrit sam, S-A-M. It's the same prefix. So synthetic, samasa. In other words, you put everything together. Synthetic doesn't mean duties made out of nylon or plastic. It means synthetic in the sense of putting everything together, synthesis. So samasa, and then in the opposite of sam is V. Sam means together, V means apart. So vyasa means placing apart. And that's why, so vyasa is called vyasa because it means something like the separator, because he separated the Vedas. He divided the Vedas. So, or the editor. So Yudhishthira asked about all these things, samasa, synthetically, analytically, according to different practices. And so it's, this is a serious intellectual discussion. Basically, the impression the Bhagavatam is giving is they really got into serious political science. That's really what these words are indicating, because it said over and over again, it was categorical, it was according to samasa and vyasa. So Yudhishthira is now the king of the world, and he's thinking, he's sort of having an oh my God moment, because he has to rule the world now. And so he's asking Bhishma, how do I do this? So they're having a very serious discussion of political science. That's what's happening here. And then the next verse, and then maybe I'll see if there's any questions, because now I can directly see all the notes you send in. So careful. So dharmartha kama mokshans cha. And so again, Dharmartha kama mokshansha. So again, religious duties are just, religious duties, dharma really means more than religious duties. It really just means duties. But if you're living in a civilized society which understands that we do everything for God, then every duty is, in a sense, a religious duty. Religion is not just a separate part of life, it's just the overarching framework in which every overarching framework, anyway, somewhat, not the greatest combination of words, but it's the context. It's sort of like the complete context or framework within which everything is done. So dharma, your duties, which are sacred duties, if you're living properly. Artha can mean money. It can mean just interest, like there are things you have to pursue for your self-interest or the interest of your family. Like you have to make some money, or you have to defend yourself legally, or you may, want to advance in your career. So all that is artha. It just means things you do in your interest. And then kama, you have to gratify your senses. Like you advance in your career, you have some money, so you buy organic food. You can afford to buy organic food. And then you can, of course, in a sense, that's artha. If you're trying to keep healthy, if you just enjoy it, if you like the taste, then it's kama. So kama is sort of directly satisfying the senses. Artha is pursuing your interest in more, not just in terms of your senses. Like let's say you eat because you need to be healthy, because you have a family to take care of, or you're a sannyasi that you have to do your preaching duties, or you have to take care of children. So therefore you have to keep yourself healthy. That's all artha, which includes making money. So in kama, it means you're just satisfying your senses. You're having a Hare Krishna ice cream festival or something. And then moksha is liberation. So Yudhishthira also asked about this. And then saha upayan. Upaya means the means, like how you actually do something. What's the practical method, the practical means? That's upaya. And saha means together with. So he asked about all these things, including like practically how do you actually accomplish it, and yatha, according to yatha as it is. In other words, he asked precisely in Mune, O sage, nanakyan itihaseshu, and then nana means various. Akhyana, narrations, and itihasas, histories. So Prabhupada translates this by recitation of historical narrations. Varnayamasa tattvavit. Now it's very interesting because the Sanskrit here, something very clever has been done here in Sanskrit, which I'll try to explain in these 4 verses. Because it began at 1925, what said Yudhishthira apricchata. Yudhishthira asked, and then you get all these words or compounds ending in long an, but now we have varnayamasa, which means he described. Now Bhishma has become the subject of the sentence, and varnayamasa, he explained, he described. Tattva Vit, a knower of Tattva. I wrote a paper a few months ago on Prabhupada Tattva. So Bhishma knew the truth, but in the truth in the sense of categorical truth, in the sense of like he knew about the soul, he knew about God, he knew about varnas and ashrams. So the word satya more often means in Sanskrit like that's true, it's not false. Like, did he tell the truth or did he tell a lie? So that's satya. Tattva means the truth. And of course, in that famous Gita verse 434, approach a spiritual master and then, learn the truth. So the seers of truth, tattva darshina, again, it's seers of tattva, seers of categorical, fundamental truth, the basic categories of of real things. And so what's interesting is all these words that end in a long an, which are all dharmartha and mokshangsha, is also, that M with a dot is also an N actually, but little euphonic adjustment. But so all these words are the objects of both Yudhisthira and Bhishma, because Yudhisthira, Apritchita asked, and so I ask, well, in English, if you say you ask about something, but in Sanskrit, it takes a direct object, like I asked or inquired. So the about is built into the verb. I asked about this. So Yudhisthira asked about, Bhishma explained. And in between these two verbs, Yudhisthira asked, Bhishma explained, you get all the different subjects. And so therefore, grammatically, all these things, these different types of knowledge and issues and topics and categories go with both verbs. So the idea here is that Bhishma explained exactly what Yudhisthira asked, because all the objects of the verb asked also go with the verb varnayamasa. So it's kind of like this, I don't know, linguistic sandwich. It's really interesting. I mean, it's you can't do that in English, because English is not an inflected language. In other words, in English, inflected language means that you understand how a word is functioning in a sentence by the ending placed on the word. And so the word order doesn't really matter that much, because whereas a word order is critical in English, or you don't understand. Like if I say, anyway, never mind, I won't go into grammar so much. So, but it's brilliant. These four verses, 25, 26, 27, 28, you have Yudhisthira asked, Bhishma replied or explained, and then everything in between grammatically can go equally with both verbs of both people. So they're both talking exactly about the same thing. Anyway, I hope that makes some sense to you, but in Sanskrit, it's really brilliant if you know Sanskrit. It's very interesting. So let me look at all the comments and see if I have to sue anyone or reward anyone. Let's see. Again, if you have a question, please put like 300 question marks around your statement so I know it's a question. So far, just comments. Oh, here's some question. Oh, no, it's the question marks are saying, please use question marks. Okay, so, okay, this is from Chaitanya Gosai, Dawson, Brazil. Srimad-Bhagavatam begins by saying that he will only deal with Sanatana Dharma. Those different duties that are mentioned would not be material. No, actually, the Bhagavatam begins by saying that the verse where it says Dharma Projita Kaitavo, it simply says that the Bhagavatam is only going to deal with duties that are not cheating, that are not kaitava, in the sense that duties that understand that ultimately our duties are to satisfy God, rather than duties in which you perhaps, because in all these Vedic duties, you chant some mantra or make some little offering or whatever, but if my real motive is just selfish, then that's the cheating, because I'm performing some Vedic duty or some ceremony which superficially or on the outside looks like, you mentioned God or something, but it's not really about God. It's really about my selfish desires. So that's what the Bhagavatam is rejecting. It's that kaito dharma kaito. And in the first verse just says, let us meditate upon the supreme truth. So if you do all of your duties meditating on Krishna, then that's what it's about. It doesn't mean you don't do these other duties. It just means you do them meditating on Krishna. So, in fact, yeah, that's what the Bhagavatam is actually saying at the beginning. Oh, from Bharata Das in Israel, Hare Krishna. It's not a question, but so Eduardo Guerrero, I think that's yes. Como podríamos traspolar de so in English, how can we transpose something if it is a valid form that women can participate actively within the practical activities of our ashram? I say it because of the radical division of the scriptures, usually radical division of the scriptures usually make when they speak of Sri Dharma. Yeah, that question is clear. One thing, Vedic culture was very chaste. They placed a very high value on chastity of men and women. In other words, people should be faithful, or they should stay in their families and take care of their families. Arjun's whole argument in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita is that if we kill all the men, God knows what the women are going to, what are they going to do? Who's going to take care of the women? And so today in the modern world, we live in a society which is extremely promiscuous. Of course, that really got going with the invention of birth control pills, in which people could be promiscuous, and if they were just, had little common sense, without any serious consequences, at least any visible consequences. But what social science shows is that when families don't stay together, when parents don't stay together, this tends to cause very serious damage to society, in the sense that almost all the people in jail, in prison, come from broken homes. I mean, obviously, many people from broken homes, divorced parents, are not in prison, but still, the people that are in prison tend to, almost all of them come from broken homes. People that do not come from stable families are much more likely to commit suicide. They're much more likely to be poor, to injure themselves or society in different ways. So therefore, society has a rational, vested interest, has a legitimate, rational interest in strongly promoting stable families. And so, I mean, clearly, it is problematic when everyone, in the modern world, everyone has a job somewhere. For example, let's say a woman has a job, and so let's say she spends 8 or 9 hours a day with other men, and including men, let's say a boss, in many cases, who, let's say, may be attractive to the woman because he has authority, he has power. And then she comes home, she's really exhausted, she has to take care of her kids, and maybe has 10 minutes of serious, meaningful conversation with her husband. Say she gets home, and then maybe her husband has to work late. So you have a situation where a woman maybe, literally has a few minutes time to really sit down and talk to her husband, but she has 8 hours a day with other men, some of whom she may find attractive, just because that's just natural. If, we all have our inner gunometers, our little, and so, it's just natural. Everyone has their own taste in the opposite sex, in the sense that, every man finds some kind of some women attractive, either physically or their personality, and women find certain kinds of men attractive. And so it's not saying, okay, women have to stay at home, because sometimes that's just not possible. But But we have to understand that the modern society, once we got birth control pills, who cares who's sleeping with whom? Who cares who's having sex with whom? Because they're not going to have a baby, and so what difference does it make? The difference it makes is it starts to destroy society. That's the little difference it makes. And so modern society, talks constantly about everyone's rights, this right and that right. But it's funny because when Biden won the election recently, I won't get into that. I mean, that whole topic now, but he said we're going back to science because Trump, denied climate change and other things. So he said, okay, now we're going, we're again accepting science. But what we find is that people on the left are very selective about which science they're interested in. And so some sciences they care about and other sciences they don't. So just as climate change is an existential threat to society, so the collapse of families is an existential threat to society, equally, perhaps more so. So the real question here is that women have a right to serve Krishna according to their nature. And, some women, just like some men, are very intelligent and very capable, and we can't treat them as if they're not very intelligent and very capable. And so that has to be somehow accommodated with or integrated with a society in which people are protected from adultery. I mean, the very structure, the way the moral codes of the society, what society finds acceptable and unacceptable, somehow protects chastity within marriage, because that's actually necessary to survive as a society. In fact, we see so much, just the fact that now there's so much conflict in society, and people are becoming so extreme on this side and that side and hate everyone that doesn't agree with them. These are symptoms of mental problems. These are actually symptoms of a society which is disintegrating, because the first integration, which is the opposite of disintegration, the first level of integration is family. The family has to be integral. The family has to be strong, and then families have to be not just grihameis, but they have to then form a strong social network which protects chastity and virtue and decency and honesty, qualities which were basically annihilated by the recent president of the country I'm living in. So the question, how do we establish this chastity, family life, which is necessary just for the survival of a society, and yet at the same time but respect the right of every human being to serve Krishna according to their nature, men and women. So that requires intelligence. And that's why you can't just, go out in the street and start screaming at everyone that doesn't agree with you and break windows and everything, because that's not intelligent and that doesn't really explain how to do things. So, it's an interesting topic which has to be carefully studied. I'll leave it at that for now. So, there's an interesting name, Marvin Madhuha Sardia. What is the opinion of Shastra that some women are very happy that they can abort their children fetus because it is their body and nobody can tell them what to do with it? Yeah, that argument, which we've heard ad nauseum, literally, it's really seriously bad philosophy. And I explained this. I gave a whole class on this, actually, so I don't want to repeat everything. I'll just say very briefly that, first of all, It's not their body. I mean, how do you establish that, let's say, a certain object, let's say O, to use formal logic, that O belongs to a person P. If you say O belongs to P, this object belongs to this person, why and how? What are the rules for that? We know that we are conscious within the body. We have certain control of the body. But for example, you can't use your body to take somebody else's property. You can't say, well, it's my body, and so I can do what I want. No, you cannot do what you want with your body. You can only do with your body things that don't violate the rights of others, which means you can't do anything you want to do with your body. And so the question is, the soul inside the womb, is that a separate person? We know that it is. Then they say that, well, but it's dependent on the mother. Well, guess what? The baby remains dependent on the mother when it comes out of the womb. So does that mean mothers can kill babies? You know, like at what age is a boy or a girl capable of kind of surviving in the world without their parents? You know, maybe they won't live very well, like sort of in a Charles Dickens novel, but maybe 11, 12, 13, whatever. Like, you know, if their parents die and let's say they live in some society, there's no place to go. They live in the street, and it used to be that way in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, and it still is that way in some societies. Early days of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, because they didn't have social programs. I mean, the thing like Social Security and you know, government agencies that look after children, that's all modern. It didn't used to be that way. That anyway, it came with industrialization, urbanization. So therefore, does that mean that parents, if the rule is basically this horrible argument people give, which is just almost unbelievably stupid, is that if person A depends on person B, therefore B has a right to kill A. So if anyone depends upon you, you have a right to kill them. Or someone depends on your body. What if you gave someone one of your kidneys? So their body actually, you know, can you kill them? Can you kill children up until the age of 11 or 12 when they're able to survive by themselves? And actually, it used to be the law in many parts of the world that, yes, parents can kill children who are dependent on them. They actually have the right to kill them. And that was the law in many places, which actually, tragically, is related to the development of thousands of, you know, long time ago of Christian theology, that God, because God is the Father, and we are God's children, and we are disobedient, God should naturally kill us. But he killed somebody else. He killed a good son. I mean, anyway, I won't go into all that, but it all comes out of this idea. So there's actually this sort of this demonic connection between Christian theology and abortion, in the sense that if someone is dependent on you, you have the right to kill them. So, okay, Krishna Vijaya Das, what is your opinion about hell? Translating from Spanish, sometimes it seems that the punishments are exaggerated for the actions committed. Talking about the punishments mentioned in the Bhagavatam, Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote about this and said precisely that they were exaggerated. Now here's the difference. In the Bhagavatam, 5th canto, there are descriptions of hell where it really seems like the punishment does not fit the crime in many cases. And then we have talk about eternal, you know, lakes of fire, which is God. What a terrible place to live, a lake of fire. In Christianity, the difference here is that if you look at Christian history, the history of Christianity, hell, these terrible hells were absolutely at the center of Christian teaching and Christian life. If you were a Christian and you went to church for many centuries, then that's what you would hear about all the time. And if you look at the great literally wars, like bloody, horrible wars where innumerable people were killed and tortured between the Protestants and the Catholics. And you say, well, what were they fighting about? Of course, many things, but essentially, they were fighting about what's the bona fide way to get free from hell. That's why there's this absolute obsession with salvation. Because if you're not saved, you really are going into these unspeakably horrible. Imagine an eternal lake of fire. It's like it's sort of like conversion by traumatizing. You traumatize people as much as you possibly can, and you traumatize them so much that they'll say, okay, I'll do anything. Okay, join our church. And so if you look at Christian history, these horrible, horrible punishments, which are not even temporary, like in the Bhagavatam, they're eternal, were absolutely at the center of the religion. Whereas if you look at Vaishnava history, no one ever talks about it. It's there in the Bhagavatam, but no one ever talks about it. If you look at the teachings of the Acharyas, they practically hardly ever talk about it. Prabhupada never talked about it. So it actually never became an important part of Vaishnava teaching, Gaudiya Vaishnava teaching. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about it being an exaggeration. I remember when I was a kid, my father, because I guess he heard that from his father. So if we misbehaved when I was a little kid, he would say, okay, I'm going to take off my belt, like he was going to hit us with his belt. And I heard this so many times. He never actually did it. My father, my whole life, never once, hit me with his belt, but I heard it many times. He was going to do that. And another thing is about these hells, the Bhagavatam, of course, has so many stories about devotees or people in general, and you never hear about punishments like this. So, they're mentioned in this chapter, but then in the lives of devotees, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Bhagavatam, it just, you never hear about it. In other words, it never actually happens. If you hear about, what you do hear about is, what's the name of that sage? Oh, Rusty. That Yamaraj, there was a sage, God, his name just slipped my mind, but Yamaraj punished the sage because when the sage was a child, he took a little straw, a little piece of straw, and he poked or even, or stabbed this little bird, which is, of course, a horrible thing to do. He was a child. So therefore, no, I'm sorry. The sage did that. So Yamaraj gave him this terrible punishment where he had to be like stabbed by someone. And so the sage was furious. And why did this happen to me? Yamaraj said, well, because when you were a kid, you stabbed a little bird. And so then the sage was so angry, he cursed Yamaraj to fall down to earth. So we may be trying to enjoy earth, but for higher souls, it's a punishment to come to this planet. So he had to take birth as Vidura. And because as a punishment. So in other words, giving heavy punishments, which are beyond the actual crime or sin, the sage said it's, he punished Yamaraj for that. So anyway, these are all some of the points. So the punishment does fit the crime. In fact, Krishna directly says the punishment fits the crime. In the Bhagavad Gita, ye jata mam prabhajante, that I reciprocate with everyone. You get what you deserve. So if the punishment really doesn't fit the crime, then probably doesn't happen. So this is from someone named Krishna West. I don't know. Someone has a name. Oh, Brahmatirtha asked, are the hills of Srimad-Bhagavatam allegorical? Bhaktivinoda says so. Yeah, I think that from what I just explained, I think that's it's kind of like where you threaten someone because you really don't want them to do it. I mean, kids do that all the time, like in English, like I'm going to knock your teeth out or something. And probably of all the times, let's say in young people, kids, if one says the other, I'm going to knock your teeth out, how many times does someone actually knock someone's teeth out? But anyway, so another question from Christian West. ISKCON, from personal observation, women throughout the years have been put on the spot regarding chastity and keeping the family values alive. If you are a woman in ISKCON, you most likely have been called names for things like speaking to the opposite sex, hairstyle, or even smiling. That's terrible. Do women really smile in ISKCON? I mean, it's a joke. It feels like women have the burden to not agitate men or to not follow their nature if they so wish to work outside the home. How can we move forward in our modern society and attract intelligent women? Well, I don't know, join Krishna West. I mean, clearly, society has to see that we are fair to everyone, and to blame women for everything when there's mutual culpability or when it's the man's fault. So yeah, clearly ISKCON has to be a society in which internally there is justice. I wrote a whole paper about this, actually, long paper about this, and people have to perceive that there is justice, and sometimes there is and sometimes there's not. And I mean, I had a personal experience, which was an awful experience, regarding a Vaishnavi who was accused of child abuse, not sexual abuse, but other kinds of emotional or physical abuse. And so the Child Protection Office, handled the case and found her guilty. And, basically her life was ended in ISKCON. And it somehow came to the GBC. So I actually studied it. Then I found out there'd been a terrible, what's called miscarriage of justice. I mean, Brahmatirtha knows everything about this because he was involved with me. The so-called trial was absurd, in the sense there were things like because for one thing, in any civilized society, when someone is accused of something, you have to have three elements. Someone has to defend the accused person. Someone has to argue in favor of the charge. Someone has to argue that the person did do that crime, whatever it is. And there has to be a judge. And there has to be a judge who is impartial. I mean, that's the whole point. The judge, the most famous symbol of justice is the goddess, or a woman holding a scale, and blindfolded. Blindfolded means impartial. It doesn't matter who the people are. It doesn't matter if, someone's my friend or not my friend, or man or woman. You just weigh the evidence on both sides. So in this so-called trial of this lady, the Child Protection Office acted not only as the prosecuting attorney to argue for conviction, but also they were the judge. That's absurd. The same people were both the judge and the prosecuting attorney. Not only that, they tampered with evidence. Witnesses were told what to say. Witnesses defending this lady were not allowed to testify. In other words, it was a nightmare. And on the GBC conference, I kept, shouting, the extent that you can shout by email. I kept arguing that this lady has to have a fair trial. And I kept saying, I have no idea. I'm not God. I don't know if this person is guilty or innocent. I'm not saying this person is innocent. I'm not saying this person is guilty. I'm simply saying I want a fair trial. And because I said that, I was blasphemed over the internet by a few really bad people that I was promoting child abuse. I was defending child abusers. I was this, I was that, but because I said we need justice. We need a fair trial. And whatever the trial decides, whatever the judges, competent judges decide, I'll accept that. So anyway, that's just one example. So when you don't have justice, even among leaders, justice is very important. And by the way, that still to this day has never been rectified. So I wrote a whole paper on justice. And that certainly includes justice to women, justice to men. And it certainly is the man's responsibility and the woman's to do the right thing. They both have this responsibility. So anyway, I got into that a little bit. I'll stop there. But yeah, so justice is extremely important. Last thing, no. Has the protection officer rectified? No, absolutely not. So that's it. Thank you all very much. It's very nice to see all of you through your little posts and everything, and appreciate your coming for the class. And I hope you'll all be back next week, where we can discuss more amazing Krishna conscious teachings. Okay, I don't think I missed any questions, but if I did, I apologize. But I think I got all of them. People that put the questions in. Okay, Hare Krishna.